Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We are picking up with 2 Samuel chapter 13. We see the repercussions and the cycle of sin that started with David. We see this passed on down to his son Amnon. Now, I'm just going to capsulize the story for you, just the cliff notes. Amnon had a half-sister and named Tamar, and she was very attractive, and he fell in love with her. Technically, he didn't fall in love. He fell in lust because love never fails. Love is patient. Love is kind. A lot of what people call love, oh, we fell in love. No, it's just lust, and you can see the fruit of that. And so we see that Amnon has a deep lust for his sister, and he uses a series of events and deception to bring her into his room, and then he rapes her, and she's pleading with him, just, hey, ask Dad, and I'm sure that, he could let us, be married, and a very different day and age and culture. All right. But anyway, and so he violates her. And so we're not going to dig into that story today. We will pick up with that and learn some important principles. But what I want to focus on is one of the consequences of sin inside of David's life and him having had a moral failure with Bathsheba, we see actually impact this story here. Because after all these things happen, message gets back to David. Now, if anybody in a reasonable mind frame would be upset, and you think there would be consequences, you think there would be discipline, you think, they would do something about that. Well, we see 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 21. When King David heard all these things, he was very angry. Okay, that's it. And anything else? Nope, that's it. That's all it says. Very angry. That's pathetic. Like, somebody raped my daughter, I don't care who they were, there would be a whole lot more than just, he's kind of angry today. Now, there should have been, according to at least the Jewish law, there should have been a whole lot more consequences that were brought down than just David was very angry. What we see is David didn't deal with it. We don't see David confronting. We don't see David talking to Amnon. We don't even see him going and comforting Tamar. We don't see him doing anything at all. He abdicated his responsibility as a parent. Now, before we judge David and get critical of David, we just got to ask the question, why? And this is the subject of today, condemnation. David probably felt tremendous condemnation because of his previous failures. And here's what the goal of condemnation is. It's to cripple. Satan brought back to David's mind his failure. David, it's probably all your fault. Had you been a better dad, if you hadn't had that sin, who are you to think you can talk to your kids about that issue? You look at you. You remember what you did back there and, Woodstock? Yeah, you remember what you did back there and such? Who are you to talk to your kids about what they should wear and who they should date? And who are you as a leader to coach this other leader over here about an issue that they might have? And that's exactly what Satan wants to do, is he always brings back up our past, which, by the way, he was the one that inspired us to do that anyway. And then he uses it against us. And then he wants to beat us over the head with that and cripple us to keep us from being able to do what we should do as parents and as leaders and as friends to other friends. Condemnation cripples. The enemy will always remind you of your past to cripple you from being who you need to be in the present. Now, when we don't deal and confront our issues inside of our kids' lives or our staff, because maybe we had the same problem somewhere in our life, or you know what, maybe you still have the same struggle that they have, because there is no new temptation under the sun. The Bible says there is no temptation that hasn't taken you, but as such is common to man. So when you feel weird because you go, man, I got this battle or I got this struggle or this, thing, you know what? You're normal. Everybody has something, and it's not uncommon to man. It's what we do with it that determines whether or not, we sinned. And so Satan will try to always stop you to keep you from confronting your kids or confronting, a former, or one of your staff members. Now, here's what happens when we cave into condemnation and we let it cripple us. So 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 22. Now, Tamnar's brother was Absalom. And so he heard what happened. He comforted his sister, and he took care of her. But this is what the Bible records in verse 22. And Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar, and it came to pass after 2 full years. So for 2 full years, David's done nothing as a parent, hasn't dealt with this situation. Absalom's letting this bitterness grow in his heart towards Amnon, and it's festering over 2 years. And the Bible tells us in Hebrews, let no root of bitterness grow up and therefore defile many. When we allow unforgiveness, when we allow bitterness, when we allow it to grow, it's going to manifest, and more than one person is going to get hurt. And so what we see is Absalom kills Amnon. He launches a rebellion, and ending up, what happens is thousands of people die. And so because David's failure to confront and bring leadership to a situation that was a crisis, even if he didn't feel worthy, or I've had this issue and I messed up, because he didn't deal with it, it brought rebellion. And ultimately, it brought division inside of his kingdom, his family, and all kinds of horrible things happened as a result. Now, when you look at a kid or a staff member that you might have, and they're being rebellious, they seem to have this resentment, and they seem to be lashing out. The question to ask is why? What is it that's causing the resentment that's manifesting as rebellion? Because rebellion is a symptom. It's not the problem. It's a symptom of the deeper issue of a resentment that's been allowed to grow underground. So what is causing the rebellion to take place? So I was a youth pastor 16 years prior to now having senior pastored for 17 years. And so I worked with thousands of teenagers, and I saw lots of situations of rebellion. And the parents would come to me, my kid's rebellious. They won't listen to me. They da-da-da-da. And I go, okay, if I could I meet with your kid alone first? And because the parents would bring me their kids, expecting me to fix the lifetime of problems they created in a 30-minute appointment. And I go, that's not a very fair expectation. So anyway, I meet with the kid first, and I go, just tell me, what's going on. And then I'll let that kid just vomit and barf. And inevitably, what I would almost always hear was things that the parents were doing that caused the kids to resent them. And then that resentment grew into rebellion. A lot of times it was simple as I try to talk to my parents and tell them how I feel, and they just shut me down and they won't listen to me. Well, that's going to breed resentment at certain points. Often, what was crazy is it came down to this. My parents won't discipline me. And I heard it over and over. The kids who had total freedom, had no boundaries, no rules, no curfews, they were rebelling to get their parents' attention to say, please, make me feel safe. Let me know you care about me. Let me know you love me, and give me some boundaries. Now, I'm going to push the boundaries and rebel against those, but I at least feel loved that you gave them to me, okay? And so if your child's rebelling, it really just comes back down to what is it that they might really be resenting you for. Now, it's not all your fault. They have choices too. But if you can find anything that you've done to contribute to resentment, then you can at least own that and deal with that and fix that. And then we can trust God with the rest. So it might be just something as simple as pulling one of your kids aside and just go, hey, I could just tell you that you seem real angry. You just seem frustrated. I love you, and I'm gonna shut up. I'm not gonna talk. I'm not gonna interrupt you. You just tell me everything you've ever wanted to tell me, and I'm not gonna react. Now, you need to follow through on that commitment, by the way, which is gonna be the hardest thing you've probably ever done. And let them talk. And you're probably gonna hear some things you don't want to hear, but if you step back and then you just go, hey, thank you for sharing that. Man, you've given me a lot to chew on. I'm gonna chew on that, and then let's catch back up, because you probably need to go digest that. And then just pray about it and let God speak to you about what you might need to own. And then here's how you start that next conversation. When you said such and such, I really thought about that. And you know what? You're right. Now, this will shock you. Your teenager can be right. Now, it doesn't happen a lot, but they can be, because they might be right about that feeling. You go, you know what? You're right. I want to ask your forgiveness. Would you forgive me for that? Man, thank you. And then you just wait. You're going to have to call 911, get jumper cables, resuscitate them. But if you'll just go in there in a different posture and not come down, you're gonna find some roots of rebellion. You're going to be able to uproot it. And I promise you, you're going to begin to see some things change inside of that relationship with your kid. Same principle, same pattern. It works with staff. And over staff, years and years of leading staff, I've had to do these same situations with staff. There's times I'll just see the staff out of nowhere. All of a sudden, start being rebellious and pushing all these boundaries. And I'll go, what's up with that? Now, my temptation is just to go, you know what? You're fired. But the better leadership principle is to go, hey, can we have a conversation? Are you okay? What's going on? This doesn't seem like you. Let's talk. And then as I let them talk, as I listen, what I'll often find is there were some things that I didn't deal with that grew into resentment, and now I have a bigger problem. And fortunately, over the years, many of those relationships in staff we've been able to salvage, we've been able to turn around, and it turned out great. But there's been a few times if I didn't deal with certain things along the way and I let it go too far, unfortunately, I lost that relationship because it just became unsalvageable. So that's our lesson for today. Condemnation cripples. So don't let it cripple you and keep you from being the leader, even if you failed, even if you've made mistakes. You still need to take responsibility to confront because you care. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.